All right, morning, Sam, man. Thanks for coming on.
I am elated, honored to be here.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm in my classroom. You're in your bathroom. It's just the things that we do to make it work. But
Yeah, I mean, me talking is a waste of time. The bathroom is where your students go to waste time to get out of class. So it works perfectly.
it's all fitting. And I mean, are you? So right now you're mostly subbing. Is that correct?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I left full-time teaching to substitute teach as I pursue stand-up comedy. So there's some weeks like this week where I'm in the classroom every day, and then there's some weeks like next week where I think I teach Monday, and then uh, I'm on the road in Wisconsin for
Yeah,
some shows, so it's
yeah,
just kind of subbing gives me the flexibility.
yeah. Is sub life been just the dream for you, or what?
No, it's awful. If you if you think you don't get respect as a teacher, imagine being a just the kids don't know you. And I mean, there's some schools, kids are cool, and there's some schools where I've made
Yeah.
relationships, and it's actually really sweet when I go to a school that I haven't been to in a while, and a kid's like, "Mr. Salem's back," and it's like, "Oh, you remember me? That's sweet." But also, there's kids who are like, "I'm gonna leave class." I'm like, "You can't." They're like, "Do you know my name?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Well, then I'm gonna leave class because there's nothing you can do about
It's
it."
like
So,
life is hard for you, Mr. Salem. I know, but I've noticed lately you've kind of been on a trend of white teacher in all black schools. Is that something that you were normally doing, or is that like a recent thing?
yeah, it's not necessarily. Well, yeah, I teach at a lot of schools with Latin populations as well,
Hmm.
um, and yeah, some very diverse schools. So that's not. Honestly, LA is just such a diverse place. There are times
Yeah, yeah,
where I'm at, a diverse private school, then an all-white public school, then a school like a charter school that's, majority people of color, and it just is funny the comments that I get when I'm like, uh, there's been times where I'm like the only white person in that building, or times where there's like very few white people. So it's funny, like the comments that I get where kids are like, "Are you mixed?" I'm like, "No." They're like, "But your lips or this," like they just make very funny comments. Or like I had a student ask me if I had vitiligo, which is like what Michael Jackson had. And so it's just, I mean, teaching is all the same. It's just funny when I'm in those classrooms. Those like the comments that those kids will make are just so much funnier to me
like they're
because,
gutless, and I find, and that's across the board. But I think my favorite one I've seen was when you brought the bag of chicken in the
oh
Ziploc
yeah,
bag. Like
yeah,
you look like you season your chicken with thoughts and prayers. I was actually because I'm in Alberta, so I teach like grade 11 and 12. So we go down to like the major center of Edmonton of 1 million people, and
go Oilers.
we um but I was marking, and like you're in this room with like 200 other teachers, so you're just marking exams all day for a week. It's decent. Um, and all of a sudden, I watch your TikTok, and I was openly in tears for like a solid 10 minutes because I just feel like that was the most. Like, that's a clever line for a
I
student to come up
appreciate
with.
it.
You get the you get the odd time where students just say things that are just rude. You're like, oh, cool, cool. Like I have like the tiniest sometimes. If I eat like salty foods, I'll get like a little bit of a lisp. Immediately, students will point it out. I'm like, oh yeah, cool, thanks. It's fine. I
Yeah,
didn't want to. I didn't want to build a good relationship with you anyway.
right. There you go. Yeah, there's some like kids joke, and it's just like, all right, whatever. That's whatever joke. But there's sometimes where kids say very funny things. So,
How long were you teaching before you kind of decided to make the change?
how long was I teaching full time? It's about 3 years. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, so really not that long because I graduated college, and I did history and education in undergrad. I played college basketball, so right after school, I was coaching college basketball at this small school where they didn't have like the funding to like have an assistant coach on a full salary, so they offered it as like a grad assistant So it was basically like a free master's and apartment and like a stipend and for coaching. So then I got my master's of education and was doing, still in the classroom for that, like doing some student teaching and all that stuff. But then right the year after graduation, college, I was coaching college basketball. And then my wife got a job out in LA. So when we moved out here, one of my teammates was coaching and teaching. So I started coaching and teaching with him. So there was a bit there where I was like deciding, like, do I want to really pursue coaching college basketball, or like, I can coach at the high school level and then teach. And then, yes, I ended up teaching.
And so did you find like it weird kind of transitioning from player to coach at all, or did that seem kind of natural for you?
I guess it's a little weird in the sense that like, coaching college right after I graduated, 22, 23 years old. I mean, there are guys on my team that I was coaching that are 24, right? Because there's not like, college isn't as linear. So there's like a little bit like, all right, well, I'm in a position of power over you, even though I'm younger than you. That was the first experience with that because, up until then, it's like high school. Oh, the coaches are obviously older. But, I mean, it felt, other than that, it felt pretty natural, I'd say.
Well, I know. I guess I only say because I wasn't a good student at all in high school. So when I got into, I literally pretty much did the exact same thing: history and education, teaching history now for my second year. For some reason, I just thought I was like, you know what? I'm just not quite busy enough. I'll just start doing a podcast too. But I guess the common thing everyone I always talk to people, and they say like the imposter syndrome is always so real. Like, have you ever had like a problem with that, or does it seems like you've pretty much transitioned pretty naturally into all these things?
Oh, no, you should hear my inner monologue. I'm always asking myself, like, what is wrong with you? Who do you think you are? All I have is imposter syndrome all the time. It doesn't matter if it's because I'm in charge of a bunch of sixth graders and I'm like, really, I'm the adult in the room, or because I'm hosting a show for Jay Leno and I'm just like, oh, I should not be in the room with this guy. So, yeah, it's weird. I mean, my first year teaching, I'm like, these are people's children, and I'm just like in charge of them. Like I think I'm a good responsible person, but also at the same time, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like me and my wife just had mac and cheese for dinner. Like, I don't know. And also, my wife and I, for all the English teachers listening, okay, my wife and I. But I think everybody has imposter syndrome. It's one of those things that even like with the mental health, people don't talk about it as much, and now people are starting to. You look at some of the best athletes in the world, like Donovan Mitchell, NBA All-Star, came out the gate like averaging over 20 a game. And there's interviews with him and he's just like, whoa, like, when is this going to stop at some point? Like, there's no way this just keeps happening. So I think that's like a misconception other people have, is because it's easy to see someone as confident or doing their thing. But I feel like there's something wrong with you if you haven't ever had imposter syndrome at least once.
Yeah, it comes across as a pretty big red flag if you're just like, I'm the best at everything.
Yeah, I think it makes you question like whatever belief system you have. If you've never questioned your belief system, it's like,
yeah,
well, how strong are those beliefs? Then
that's true.
Similar thing, like you have self-confidence, but I think a touch of imposter syndrome to make sure, like, oh, because when you feel the imposter syndrome, you're able to say like, no, I did do my whole degree in this and I did student teaching and I've had this interaction before. So I would say yeah, imposter syndrome totally
Yeah,
normal.
and I know the cycle of discussing imposter syndrome is always pretty much the same route. It's like, oh, it's kind of weird if you don't, but I just find it's, even though people have these conversations, it's still, even now, like, I'm pretty comfortable. I've taught these same courses like 4 and 5 times now, but I'll stand up at the front of the room and I'm like, what am I going to do today? They're all just staring at me and they're not saying anything. It's like a terrifying feeling. And now I've never done comedy before, but I kind of, do you think you were kind of prepared for comedy in a way? Like going on stage and just having people stare at you and like not
For sure.
react?
there's a lot there's like a lot more comedians who have a teaching background than I feel like a lot of people even realize. And yeah, there is something about like there's a part of teaching that is performing, right? You're trying to engage kids and get them to pay attention and get them excited. There are kids telling you like anything from you look like you season your food and with thoughts and prayers to uh, profanity laced rant of why you're ruining their day. And so yeah, sometimes sixth graders are a lot tougher crowd than a bunch of adults who are having a couple drinks. So I'd
Yeah,
say
that's
it's great
that's fair.
preparation for sure.
When did you do your first show for comedy? Like, when did you just kind of make the decision, like, I'm gonna try stand-up comedy? I feel like being in LA, if you're like any sort of online presence, you eventually want to start it. But
Yeah, my following came after me starting stand up. I Comedy was always something in the back of my brain, but again, imposter syndrome and just like I don't know how to do that. I just never. I was like too scared to start, and so when I moved to LA, I think I did one little like class. Like you could just sign up for like a little once a week, 8 week course on like writing jokes and like it was kind of corny, but at the same time, for someone like me who was like too scared to just like go out there and
yeah,
start it, it was nice. But then I just didn't do anything with it. Like coaching basketball after school. That's feels like a full time job in and of itself. On top of
yeah,
teaching, on top of trying to be a good husband and have time to hang out with my wife and
yep.
all that stuff. So it was once the pandemic hit, I like most people, it put a pause on everything and makes you just question like what am I doing with my life? Do I enjoy the things I'm doing? And just made me realize like, well, if I want to do comedy, I actually have to do comedy. Like I can't just like think about it. So as soon as things started lifting up, like spring of 21, I want to say, is that right? Yeah, spring of
I think
21.
so. Yeah.
That's like when things were really like fully starting to open, or at least like outdoor stuff. I just started going to open mics and like because it was a pandemic, a lot of that was just standing in a pizza restaurant parking lot to 8 other comics and just being like, what's the deal with this? And so, yeah, that was like probably April. And in like May, I had my first show at like a proper comedy club, like 100 people sold out, did 5 minutes. And then, yeah, you just kind of slowly climb from there. So.
And so, were your jokes mostly like education centered, or what was kind of your lane?
Yeah, and even today, like a lot of my stuff is centered around teaching. I definitely do stuff that non-teaching jokes as well. But I mean, I don't, I definitely don't view myself as like a teacher comedian. I just view like anybody else. You write jokes about your life, and a lot of my life is, you know, same. I have friends who are servers or bartenders. They have a decent amount of jokes about being a server or bartender because that's the everyday
Yeah, like yeah.
experience that you're living now. The thing that is almost feels like a little bit of a cheat code with jokes about education is you don't need to be a teacher to get them because everybody has had a school experience. Even if you're homeschooled, you still understand like uh, everybody. It's just the hardest part about comedy is getting everybody on the same page and putting the context out there. Here's the context for the joke I'm about to tell. Well, I don't really have to spend much work setting context because okay, people know freshmen in high school are wild, right? They know they say
Yep.
silly things. They know they're whatever. So I found that it's an easy way to connect. And especially like some clubs, you're on a lineup in LA. It's a lot of like dating app jokes or sex jokes or whatever. And like any comedians, there's some people who have hilarious jokes about those things and maybe some that are kind of hack, whatever it is. But what's nice is the teaching is such a change up from
Hmm.
a lot of other material that people talk about that it's almost like, oh, cool, we already have the context and it's something that the other comics aren't talking about. So it's like, it's fresh and new. So that it's
Well,
definitely
it's like
cool.
the other comics can't really talk about it. So it almost kind of gives you, I mean, they could, but then obviously they could tell their own stories, but you don't really know what it's like to kind of be in that context with those students unless you've actually like done it.
Right,
Whereas you can talk about maybe being in a restaurant with the server and seeing some crazy shit go down and kind of still relate to it. Um,
right,
but yeah, I guess I kind of always ask the question, but it's pretty much like an obvious answer. Like, how did you kind of get into these new things? But it's like I think it's funny that I feel like you have such a prescribed kind of teacher method of going into teaching. You're like, oh, I took this 8-week course. And then I just like kind of, that's kind of like our mentality is like, okay, this kind of gives me permission to not think about teaching because I'm actually like taking something that I'm doing, not just like doing
right.
random stuff on the side. But
Yeah, for me, yeah, it's just there's some people that's like, why would you ever take a class like a stand-up comedy class? Like no one can teach you, and it's like true. At the end of the day, you have to figure out like what is your funny in your life. But I think it can be helpful, just like because there are no rules and no right way to go about it. Like usually the
mhm,
person teaching the class has experience in the stand-up scene, so they can even just give practical like, hey, when you go to open mics, do this. Like just things that it might take you a month of doing comedy to realize. So it even
mhm.
but yeah, it was very teacher of me to be like, let me just sample a
Let me
course.
find this online course during COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway.
Yeah. Would you recommend teaching to someone?
But I recommend it. Sure, why not? I mean, it's
No, and like, yeah, but I guess like the common narrative kind of go now is like, oh, no one wants to teach, and I don't know how that's kind of played out in the U.S. I'm up in Canada, but it seems across the board where people are generally leaving more. But I guess like, what did you like love about it, and what did you like about it?
yeah, I mean, it's a boring answer for recommending, but it's just like any other job. Like, yeah, you have to you have to go into it knowing that there's gonna be flaws and that you can't. It's sad, but like you can't change everything that's flawed in the system. Now you can definitely be a part of making things better. You can be there for the
Mhm,
students, but like there just are systemic things that like you know do get in the way, and so I think the burnout. Like protecting yourself from burnout when it comes to like carrying the stress of everything or always like taking on parents' concerns. For me, what my, I mean, I would say what I loved about teaching, biggest strength, biggest weakness, very relational person. So I think like the mentoring aspect of like, I, I always think it's funny that people are like, oh, kids are terrible, like da da da, and it's like, okay, one, have you seen adults? Like, like I don't think there's any difference.
No.
Two, like you can go back to the times of like Aristotle and Socrates, and there's writings of like the younger generation does not da 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 da. It's tale as old as time. And so what I like mentoring the next generation, and I even like I did like a merch drop like it's like it's kids these days with like sunflowers, and it's like reclaiming kids these days to like a positive because people are like, oh, kids these days. And it's like, no, it's the kids
Mhm.
these days that are like gonna save the world. And again, to say biggest strength, biggest weakness, Gen Z, Gen A, they don't accept systems just because it's how it's been done, which is awesome when it comes to social justice or whatever, like
Yep.
seeing the last and the lost and the least. When it's not great is okay, I am the teacher, I'm the substitute teacher who's in charge. And them wagging their finger in my face, boy, like, boy, I don't know who you think you are. Da 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 da. Da. Like, I don't know who you are, right? Well, that's not great. You still gotta like respect like
Yeah.
the golden room. But um, so for me, I think I loved the mentoring aspect, and maybe to the detriment of I mean, I knew my content area like enough
Mhm.
to teach
Yeah.
them what they needed to know, but I was not that teacher who like really could go so deep and talk for like do a 5 hour lecture on it. I mean, I met the
Well,
standards,
and
I taught them what they needed to know, but that was
yeah, and at the same time, it's like, okay, like we're teaching grade 8. Like I think that was when I with my horrible imposter syndrome when I first started, I was teaching the Aztecs, grade 8. I was like, man, there's such a wealth of knowledge here. I think it's kind of hilarious. The guy who wrote the book on the Aztecs name is Michael Smith. It's like one of the whitest names alive.
yeah,
And It was I like went through the whole book, like did this whole like lecture series. My mentor teacher just looked at me and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Like they need to know this stuff." They're like, "The chapter's 6 pages." I'm like, okay, I guess so. I
Yeah,
guess you're right." But
yeah.
no, I guess I always kind of come back to because I always kind of was shocked, I guess, the most going into teaching about how much kind of shit talking there was. Not just and I don't want to say like shit talking in terms of like every teacher was saying bad things, but just the kind of swarm of negativity about like, oh, like, the kids are doing this and like the job was blah blah blah. I just don't think it's that. Like I think I'm kind of standing alone, I guess, in a way, good, but
No,
whatever.
there's plenty of teachers who love their jobs. It's definitely there's school districts that are really tough to work in. There's school districts that are awesome to
Mhm.
work in. There's a school here in LA, this um that I sub at a lot, and it's um like the teachers are so passionate about their job. The kids are really good students. Like the community there is awesome. Like there's definitely schools. I think it's the same thing um as a history teacher, I should know this. Like was it like the 60s, like the silent majority that they talked about and like the counterculture movement. And it was just like, okay, you have the hippies and the drug use and the this and that, and it's rampant. No, it's
Yeah,
just those are the people making the noise, right? The
yeah.
silent majority are the people that are just kind of middle America doing their
That
thing, bland
is
lifestyle.
a great connection.
And so I think for teaching, like, squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? It's
Mhm.
obviously the people who go to social media and like, this is why I'm leaving teaching. Yeah, you're going to make a big post about why you're leaving teaching if it's gotten to a point where you're so fed up. The person who's
Mhm.
worked for 15 years and is content in their job, they're not going to make a post of, this is my
No, they're just
16th year and I'm completely fine with everything. So I think there's some things that need to change in the teaching world. I
yeah.
think there is a disconnect between administrators and parents, parents and teachers, teachers and administrators. Like there definitely is a
Yeah.
disconnect. There are things that need to change. Kids, the level of apathy that you see in students. Like
Mhm.
a student who comes and cusses you out and shouts at you, okay, well there's still something in there. The
Yeah.
kid who just shows up to school and sits there, hey, you're gonna have this consequence if you don't do your work. Hey, you're gonna get, and it gets to a point of like, you're gonna get kicked out of school. And if they're just completely apathetic, that is
Mhm.
a really hard thing for a student or for a teacher to go up against. If you're really passionate about something, you love your content area, you love your kids, and you're just met with apathy, that's going to make burnout happen a lot
Yeah.
quicker. And so I would say overall, yeah, there's plenty of people who love teaching. There are some things that need to change, but the people who make the most noise are the people saying, I'm no longer everyone, I'm fed up, I quit. And some of those rightly so.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they shouldn't
Yep.
make those posts. It's just the way it is.
I always kind of reflect back on like part-time jobs I've had where I've just absolutely hated my life like for
Yeah.
10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and I'm just like, this isn't that bad. I'm like, I don't know. It's just not that deep to me, but I mean, I don't have these like mega corporation deals like hanging over my shoulders and doing some other sort of business job. Like, not that it's not a difficult job, it is time consuming to an extent, but yeah, I've just never really been whatever. But and I was told a story the other day about like some of the crazier things that kind of happen in the school, and I was told there was a time here in Alberta. The person I was talking to told me at their school they taught grade 9, and the morning of, they're like, "Hey, like we got like 7 missing boys here this morning." And he's like, "Oh, that's weird. I thought they didn't say anything yesterday. They weren't going to be here." And they had actually stolen the school bus
Oh, that's
that was
extreme.
sitting
That's
that
not
was
that's
sitting
not
out
just a
front.
regular
That's
hide.
that's not just a regular, "I'm gonna go vape in the bathroom and try and get a glass for
Yeah,
10 minutes."
that's next level. That's
It was
Grand Theft Auto. That's
and they ended up finding him like 3 streets over, everything was fine, but I thought it was hilarious because literally grade 9 is citizenship in Alberta.
But
I was like, clearly this guy wasn't doing the best teaching, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah. What do you think that non-teachers don't understand about teaching? You kind of talked about that disconnect just then, but like, what do you think is there?
Um, I think, hmm, I think, I guess what they don't understand is the one, like I said, like, oh, kids are awful these days, and it's just like, no,
Yeah.
just like regular human beings. There's some that can be really hard to deal with, and some that are a pleasure. I think it's also, yeah, like what they don't understand is if you have a class full of 30 kids, well, sometimes you have 6 kids who have not had breakfast that morning. You
Yeah.
have 2 kids who were up all night because they just went through a breakup or they heard their parents fighting. You have, like, this isn't just some, like, this isn't a robotic thing where you can just easily be like, here's the information, input, output. It's not just a linear thing. And so it's funny when you hear people like social emotional learning, that's an awful thing to do. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, like really all it is like maybe we take 5 minutes out of a class period to just like,
To chill.
hey, hey, here's how you have awareness. Like here's how you have
Yeah.
situational awareness, which plenty of adults are lacking too. It's like,
Yeah.
but and I think it's funny when they're just um like my student roast jokes, like videos that I make where it's like students making fun of me and people, and I think this is a small minority of people, but they're like, the fact that you allow this disrespect, da 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 da, like you clearly don't know how kids work. Yes, there are times where a kid tries to say something that's like actually mean and hurtful,
Yeah.
but guess who students don't roast? The teachers they hate. Like if they
100%.
don't mess with you, they don't talk to you. If you're a teacher who shows up in open-toed shoes and they like make fun of you for having your feet out and are like educator Andrea is her tag on Instagram.
Yeah.
Like we just did a collab video and she's all of her videos are blowing up. Everyone go check her out if you haven't. But like, yeah, she had a video like her students, she was wearing sandals and her students barked at her feet because she had the dogs out, right? And it's just like someone can say like that is the most disrespectful thing ever. It's like, well, actually, what it is, and sure, if it becomes a distraction and they keep doing it for too long, but what it actually says is, hey, this is a teacher that we love and respect enough, and we feel safe enough to interact with the way that we show love to our friends. Now, it can't pass a point. There still needs to be the power dynamic. Teachers aren't there to be friends with their students, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's just funny to me when people are like, you're allowing kids to be disrespectful. It's like, oh, well, you don't understand how this works.
Has anyone ever said anything you like really cut deep, or do you usually pretty
Students?
dismissive? Yeah, like I think that you were like that was funny, but
I don't think so.
like the
It's
thoughts and
funny when
prayers
they
one's
try
pretty
to say,
innocent, but
what do you say?
like the thoughts and prayers one, like that's pretty innocent, like that's just hilarious.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. I
like,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, that's funny. No, I don't think like it's funny when they try to say something that cuts deep. I'm actually, you're getting a Sam Salem exclusive before I make the video. I'm probably gonna post a video about this one this week, but
okay,
just
yeah,
2 days ago, this girl, I don't know, they're feeling some type of way. I like they were just well, I'm not gonna get into it. They were being disrespectful
yeah,
to the point where it's disrupting the whole class, and I was
yeah,
trying to kick them out of class. I was like, you all need to go to the office, like
yeah.
just spend some time outside of class. And she's like yelling at me, like, you being disrespectful. And then she like tries to end it with like, and why don't you go talk about this on your podcast? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, and this is a school this is my first day teaching that student at that school before. Like, and I have had clips that recently have like blown up on the
Yeah,
internet. So I'm like, all that tells me is that you know who I am and that my clips are reaching a wide variety of people. So you you as the kids would say, you thought you ate, but really all you did
yeah.
was compliment me. I'm like, thanks, yeah, thanks for knowing who I am. Appreciate it.
I didn't know that was a new saying. You thought you ate.
Yeah, that's a like yeah, it's like if someone like they ate that up, left no crumbs. Um, you never heard that before?
No.
Is that not a thing in Canada? That's like definitely a
No.
thing that kids will say. One time, a kid tried to like
You
say,
ate that and left no crumbs.
yeah, that just means like you really like you did that
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
you crush it. But one time, some kid, what did he say? What did he try to? He tried to say something to me really snarky, like he said, like, "Mister, you da 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 da," and I was just like, "Oh well, who asked?" And which isn't even that funny, but to middle schoolers, like that's like
No.
the most
Oh.
devastating when someone says something, hitting with a who asked. And I said that, and these group of girls started laughing, and one of them went, "What's 4 plus 4?" And just a group of them went, "8." And then they're like, "He ate you up." And I was like, that's funny. That's cute. That's hilarious.
That is hilarious. Oh man. How how honest are you about stories that you tell about yourself? Or I guess like how deep like when you were like when kids ask like, oh, like what were you like in high school or university? Like what are some of the like
Oh,
what's your limit? At the
um,
smile.
well, no, that's just funny because sometimes you gotta gaslight the gaslighters. This younger generation is so big into gaslighting. This girl came up to me and with my TikTok page open and was like, "Miss," or she didn't have it open. She wasn't holding it up yet, but she was holding her phone. She goes, "Mister, I found you on TikTok." I was like, "Oh, I don't have TikTok." And she's like, "Yeah, it's right here." And she shows me, and I'm like, "That's not me." She's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, no, you're not the first person people say that I look a lot like him." And I'd written my name on the board, like Mr. Salem, and she looks at the board and looks back at it like, "But you guys have the same last name." I'm like, "I know, isn't that crazy?" And
That's
then she plays the
crazy.
video, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, your voice is different." And I was like, "Yeah, see, it's not the same person." And so, uh, I don't know, with students, I mean, some of them do recognize me, or teachers will. Not like a crazy often, but that does happen. I don't like to talk about doing like stand up or anything like that to students
Yeah.
because then they're like, "Tell us a joke," and it's like
Yeah, that's not how it works.
my jokes are never going to be funny in that setting. Like it's not. It's just going to be awkward. So, but when I was a full time teacher, I mean, I wouldn't get too like I wouldn't get like cross the line, get too personal, but I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I played like college basketball," or I would share like if a kid was like distraught about prom dates, I'd be like, share
Yeah.
an anecdote, be like, "Hey, look, like this feels like a big deal now. Here was my awkward prom experience. Like it doesn't even you
Yeah.
don't even think about it." So I guess things like that I share, but it's funny now. But now kids will look you up on the internet and uh, they'll just tell you things about yourself. So
I know. Even like I haven't been doing this for too long, but even students will come up be like, "Oh, I listened to your podcast," and I'm like, I don't want to know that really. Like, not that. I mean, thank you, but like, I don't know.
be
No,
like,
kind
share it
of.
with 10 people so we can get the downloads.
Yeah, pretty much. Do you ever find it weird, kind of? Because honestly, the one thing that kind of frustrates me about teaching is when I'm trying to learn from other teachers, and there's just this like built-in humility in them to just be like, oh, like no man, you'll just get there. Like they'll be great teachers. I'm trying to get like good advice from, and maybe the advice is the humility. But do you find it weird, like kind of advertising yourself now?
I find it weird advertising myself. That's a great
Like you're
question.
trying, obviously, like you're trying to like,
Yeah, I think that's yeah. It growing up, suburbs, Midwest. It is just a very like, oh, don't be, even if you have something nice at your
yeah,
house or whatever it is, it's like you don't want to show up the
yeah.
neighbors or this or that. Not that me growing up, I don't think my family had anything nice that showed up the neighbors in that way, but that mentality, I would say, like, you mean is it hard, like, promoting myself in terms of, like, comedy and all that, or just what
just
do you mean?
just in general, because I guess like even being like recognized by teachers, they might think like, oh, like that's Sam Salem, and like they might have this kind of like preconceived perception of you. But is it weird to kind of or has it kind of been like, this is just what I do?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I think sometimes I think it's funny the way people approach me about it because I have had people who I think people get too in their heads. And look, I'm a nobody, so I don't want to like truly like I'm a nobody. I don't want to like to get it twisted, but it is when people are just normal and they're like, "Oh, hey, I followed you online." Like, "Oh, I've seen your stuff," or "I follow you." I'm like, "Oh, cool, that's awesome. Thank you so much." And it's a very normal interaction. But when people are like, "Hey," so like they basically try to bring it up without bringing it up, that's when it feels like uncomfortable, and I'm just like,
You look like that Sam Salem guy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think it's what is weird to me is promoting like, I have shows coming up in Washington, DC, San Diego, Phoenix area, like trying to add Kansas City, Chicago, all those things. It is
Yeah.
weird for me to be like, hey, spend your money and come out and see me. But if you're not confident about that, people don't want to, if you're like, hey, maybe it'd be a good time if you see me, people are like, well, that doesn't sound like a good time. But also, I've
That's
had,
right. You kind of just got to be direct. It's like, come on out, like
and
spend
yeah,
your
and it
money.
feels, and it does feel like a little weird to like, you know, doing just shows in LA, like not my headlining shows, like I'll throw it up on my story, like, okay, I'm going to be in Santa Monica tonight. And like I had a woman was like, hey, I got a babysitter to come like watch you tonight. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. Like that's my initial reaction. Even though, I mean, I had a great set. She had a good time, like whatever it was.
Yeah.
But it is a weird feeling. And yeah, I guess that's interesting in teaching culture. I guess there is I think maybe it just links back to imposter syndrome. If somebody's like,
Yeah.
wow, you are a teacher who has this figured out, I'm sure just a lot of teachers are just like, I don't have it figured out. But
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's just kind of like, it is such a, because again, even for myself, trying to promote a podcast, I'm like, this feels so against like my nature of kind of how it was instilled in me. But I'm kind of just being unapologetic and be like, please watch.
yeah, I mean,
But
we got you. I mean,
I just got a
I
couple
think
more yeah,
if so, just real quick, if you don't believe in what you're doing, why would other people believe in what you're doing? So,
100%. 100%. So I just got a couple more things to ask you. Do you think that you're starting to like plan to eventually fully phase out of teaching? Or do you think you'll probably always kind of like try and make an effort to like still sub and kind of stay in that lane?
um, uh, I think the goal for me is to be full-time stand-up.
Hmm.
I I'm not sure. I mean, I guess what I've learned is you never know. Like when you get to like, we have all these like little benchmarks that we want to hit, and you think you're going to
Hmm.
feel one way, and then you feel another. So, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out that I would still sub every once in a while. I
Hmm.
think what I've said before is because I like the mentorship aspect of teaching and like the, pouring into the next generation and encouraging them. It doesn't necessarily need to be in a classroom role. So I would see myself maybe
That's fair.
still being involved in like, you know, my church's youth group or being
Mhm.
involved at like a youth center or going, I don't know, even just like going to juvie and like volunteering there, whatever it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
I think there are
Like
still ways
to
to
serve. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, like yeah, serve, encourage the next generation without being in the classroom because I think at a certain point, I mean, who knows? It could be 10 years later and I haven't made any leeway with comedy. I mean, my hope is that
Mhm.
I make it, but maybe I am that
Yeah.
Netflix special comedian that I dream to be.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think that, like I said, there are such constraints on even being a substitute teacher where you might be out of school for one day and never go back again. So like you don't actually
Yeah.
get to like build that relationship where I would like to be in a role like a
That's
volunteer
fair.
position or whatever where I actually
More
develop the
consistent.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I got one more thing. I always end off the podcast with a signature quote because I look like a big quote guy and I am. Education is what remains once we forget everything that we learned in school. What do you kind of want people to take away, either when you're subbing for them or teaching them to take away from their time with Mr. Salem?
Great question. I think and I need to do a better job of this. Like to, to hit with another quote that I'm definitely gonna botch, but like people won't remember like what you said or did, but they'll remember the way you made them feel. And so I think I definitely need to do a better job of that. But I want people to, especially students, to walk away like, all right, that's an adult who I'm not going to roll my eyes at because they're just part of like this system that's just like, do this because you have to. Like that was somebody who actually seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, or was
Mhm.
honest with me, or someone that actually was like showing love and encouraging. So this is really convicting myself. Like looking back, I'm like, dang, sometimes I do let those kids get the best of me when they're like giving
Yeah.
me a hard time. But moving forward, I definitely want to do a better job of like, yeah, kids walk away remembering like, well, he was corny, but at least he encouraged us.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you.